Going on, everybody? And today we've got something a little bit different here. This isn't your regularly scheduled podcast episode, but we wanted to do something a little bit special because we've made it to the halfway point of the NFL season. And although draft season really starts in January once week 18 is done, that doesn't mean we can't have a little fun. So Nick and Ader and I have decided to do basically a two-person mock draft where we alternate the selections and we pick, and we're going to go through the entirety of the first round today. So, as I mentioned, this is something that we're both doing. So, Nick Nader is present with us, if you would like to greet everybody.
Just everyone knows, this is always my idea. Octi is really bad at planning things.
Yes, this was his idea. We'll give him the credit there. So, basically what we did was I got the odd picks, he got the even picks, and we are going to rationalize all of our selections. So let's not waste any time and let's get this show on the road. So since I get the odds, I get the number one pick, and keep in mind we are using PFF's current draft order, which is basically based off of the current standings as of the first 8 weeks of the NFL season. And the Arizona Cardinals currently are penciled in with the number one pick. It's been a weird year for the Cardinals because it seems like they were kind of fun and frisky early on. Now they're starting to struggle, but they should get Kyler Murray back eventually. Now, I think Kyler Murray's good enough to win this team a couple of games and move them out of the top spots. But if they don't win a couple of games with Kyler Murray and they continue to be one of the worst teams in the league and get the number one pick, I expect this will be a quarterback, and in particular, I think it'll be Caleb Williams out of USC. Now, I don't per se love this pick. I don't think Caleb Williams is as generational as everybody is saying. I think there is a legit dialogue to be had for Drake May to be QB1 in this class, and I obviously haven't decided my order yet. It's the start of November, but I think there's more of the conversation there than people think. Now, if the Cardinals do get the number one pick, I think they'd probably be foolish to pass on one of the QBs, even though I do believe in Kyler Murray, unless you can get a King's ransom from somebody trying to move up, which is also very possible. But for right now, I'm going to go chalk and have Caleb Williams as the number one pick.
Moving to the second pick with the Chicago Bears, this is the first of two picks they have in the top three. This is the one they got from Carolina in the trade back from the first overall pick last year. Besides the Cardinals, this is another team where you expect them to be semi-high, especially with having two firsts. And the question becomes, do you stick with the QB that you have, in this case Justin Fields, or do you move on and get a new guy? In this case, it would most likely be Drake May. But I have them going all in on Justin Fields. I think building a very talented roster around him, giving him another year, that's what you want to see. He's injured the past few weeks. They had to roll with a D2 undrafted guy who hasn't played too bad. But if you give Justin Fields a talented roster, give him an O-line, give him weapons, give him a defense, I want to see what he can do. And I want to build around Justin Fields and give him one more year and right before his contract is up. So for the second pick, I have the Bears going with Olu Fashanu, the big tackle out of Penn State. This was a guy who was expected to go high last year's draft if he declared. There was, I think, four tackles that went top 15 last year. He would have been probably top 10 in that Darnell Wright, Paris Johnson range. Like I said, with Darnell Wright, the Bears took a tackle last year at pick 10 after trading back with the Panthers and the Eagles. So getting another tackle to pair alongside Darnell Wright, they signed a guy like Nate Davis from the Titans last year, giving Justin Fields a good O-line to work with so that he doesn't have to rely on his legs. Let him develop as a passer, let him work what he can do. We've seen him. He has the talent. Give him more talent around him and see what he can do with it.
So with the third pick, the Bears are back on the board, and I kind of went into the mock draft with the idea of whoever Nick Nader doesn't pick between Marvin Harrison Jr. and Drake May with the second pick is the guy I'm going to pick at third. But he ends up going with a little bit of a curveball with Olu Fashanu, who's a blue-chip prospect in his own right. So that kind of poses the question of which direction do I go? And I think there is certainly an argument to be had here for Drake May. If the Bears continue to struggle, it would make a lot of sense to move on from Justin Fields and grab a guy who appears to be the significantly better long-term piece. However, I could also see the Bears going all in with Justin Fields and trying to run it back, and if it doesn't work, then they'll probably have another high pick, and they can draft a quarterback in the future. So because of that, I've been picking Marvin Harrison Jr. You're grabbing one of the best wide receiver prospects of the last decade. You're grabbing one of the best offensive line prospects of the last decade. Those are two focal points for your offense, whether it's Justin Fields at quarterback or somebody new in the future. I will say, I think going this route for the Bears will be a mistake. If you have two top 3 picks, you either have to pick a quarterback with one of them or trade back and get a king's ransom from somebody looking to grab a quarterback. If you really want one of Olu Fashanu or Marvin Harrison Jr., that's fine. But I don't think grabbing both of them is the way to go. I think that would be a big mistake, but I don't exactly trust this front office to get it right. Regardless, they are getting two fantastic players, probably the two best non-quarterback prospects in the entire draft.
And sticking with me going with curveballs, with pick 4, the New York Giants, they made the playoffs last year, and this year they have heavily disappointed. The O-line looks abysmal. Daniel Jones has not lived up to the money that he's making. Saquon Barkley might want to look out. They just traded Leonard Williams at the deadline. The defense not the same as last year. They have a lot of issues. And you could go Drake May. You could get a QB to replace Daniel Jones. But then you just have Daniel Jones as a backup. No one's going to want to trade for him because of the contract. With how many holes this team has, I think the best case scenario is get probably BPA. I think the Giants would look at a guy like Marvin Harrison, maybe even a Brock Bowers, just to get a weapon for Daniel Jones. But I think they could do that in possibly free agency, make a trade. They got Darren Waller last year. Brock Bowers is just a young version of Darren Waller. He's a freak. But I have them going with the freak on the defensive side, Laiatu Latu from UCLA. He has been fantastic the past 2 years with UCLA. He had double-digit sacks last year. He's nearly there this year. He has just been a wrecking force on the D-line. I have not done too much looking into a lot of these prospects. Obviously, we know Marvin Harrison, Caleb Williams, Fashanu, so on and so on. But Latu is a guy who I really want to look into after looking at his physicalities and his stats and everything. I cannot wait to be able to get inside of the plays and the concepts that Latu is running here at UCLA. He's a large specimen, 6'5", 265. If he goes to the combine, I cannot wait to see what he does run. I think he's going to be a physical freak, and depending on if there are trades, because I think a team like the Bears or the Cardinals might want to trade back. If there are trade backs, I'd be really curious to see where a guy like Latu goes, because I feel like a lot of the QBs are going to go very high. Drake May's probably not going to go not top 3, depending on what the trades look like. But for the Giants, I think getting BPA, just getting a guy to fill the holes on your team and just build for the future still, because this front office is something. And yeah, just get a guy for the defense, help out the defense side of the ball that has been not the greatest this year, and hopefully maybe get Daniel Jones and the O-line to fix their issues.
So with the 5th pick, the New England Patriots are going to run this one up to the podium. I don't think Drake May falls to 5. I think somebody probably moves up to get him, or one of Chicago or the Giants just picks him. But in this scenario, he falls to 5. This is a super easy pick for New England. I don't think I have to go into much detail. This would be a slam dunk for them.
And then moving to the 6th pick with the Green Bay Packers, I think they're looking at a guy like Marvin Harrison. But the next best option is one of the best tight end prospects we've seen in a while, and that's Brock Bowers from Georgia. He is just a physical specimen. I'd say he's on par with Kyle Pitts as one of the best tight end prospects we've seen. I think Kyle Pitts went 4, I believe, to the Falcons, and depending on what happens in the actual draft, who ends up where, we could see him go even higher than 6 right here. Like, if the Packers continue to be bad and get a top 5 pick, maybe even get the pick 4, they could just pick him at 4 outright. I would not be shocked to see Brock Bowers go higher than a guy like Marvin Harrison. Both of them are physical specimen. They're some of the best prospects we've seen in years. And Brock Bowers is just that dude. Jordan Love needs help. Jordan Love hasn't been the greatest. The O-line's been bad. Aaron Jones playing injured. A.J. Dillon is just a bigger version of Cam Akers. And the weapons that they have are not good. Luke Musgrave, Romeo Dobbs, Christian Watson, they have just not been there. They've been dropping everything. Jordan Love needs help. And getting a guy like Brock Bowers, that is one of the best weapons a guy can get, like Jordan Love. And to be able to maybe be the guy for the future, Brock Bowers is someone that the Packers are going to need.
So with the 7th pick, we've got the Indianapolis Colts, and I certainly think they will try to make Anthony Richardson's life as easy as possible. And there are good options at wide receiver and on the offensive line. Joe Alt, the tackle out of Notre Dame, is a guy I thought about here. He's a very good pass protector. But I really think it makes sense to get Anthony Richardson a true number 1 receiver. And lucky for the Colts, you've got some great choices here. Roma Dunze out of Washington, super talented. Keon Coleman from Florida State is an absolute freak. But I had them going with Malik Nabers out of LSU, who I think arguably has been the best wide receiver in the entire country this year. This is a guy who can play inside and out, good route runner, good hands. He's solid after the catch as well. And I like his overall versatility. He can play in the slot, he can play out wide, and I think that flexibility is going to be nice within this Colts offense. They've got some pieces already at receiver. Josh Downs might be the most underrated rookie in the entire class. How he fell to the 3rd round, I don't know. Teams clearly overthought him, but he is phenomenal. Michael Pittman Jr. is a cool player, although I believe he is a free agent going into the offseason. I don't think they've paid him. So regardless of what they do with Michael Pittman, they're probably going to need another guy, and I think Malik Nabers' well-rounded skill set is going to be really valuable on this offense.
Moving to the 8th pick with the Las Vegas Raiders, they recently just fired their head coach, their GM, and their offensive coordinator, all fairly deserving so. But since they let Rich Bisaccia go and hire Josh McDaniels, the Raiders have just not been good. They traded for a guy like Devontae Adams, but they got rid of Derek Carr. They signed Jimmy G, who's now been benched for Aiden McConnell. And it just looks like the Vegas Raiders are a mess. They could go QB. They could go receiver, especially if Devontae Adams gets traded. They could go O-line. Joe Alt is a great tackle prospect. They could go corner. There's a certain corner from Bama that's really good. They could go so many different places. But the defense, which has not been as bad as I realized, I looked into some of the stats lately. But besides Max Crosby, on that defense, there are not a lot of guys. They just drafted an edge in Tyree Wilson last year. But I think going more interior, getting Derzon Newton from Illinois. He is a guy who can play the nose tackle. He can play the DT. He can rush the QB. He can stop the run. The past couple years at Illinois, he has just been a freak of nature. He has been fantastic. And there's not many flaws in this game. I like the size that he brings to the position. He can play on the edge if need be. He can do a lot of versatility on that D-line. And getting a partner with Max Crosby is something that I think this Raiders team needs. And if you want to keep a guy like Max Crosby happy and you don't have to trade him, get a guy alongside him to help him do the dirty work. That's going to be one of the better things to build for the future, getting a guy to solidify the defense while you go look for your receivers, go look for your Josh Jacobs replacement, and eventually go get your franchise QB.
This Denver Bronco pick here at number 9 is definitely one of the most interesting ones in the draft for me because there's a lot of different avenues the Broncos could look at, as I would expect that their roster gets a lot of turmoil over the next couple of seasons. Quarterback is in play here. Russell Wilson has not been the problem, but I wouldn't rule it out. I think you could certainly look to add a weapon. The receivers on the board are very intriguing. Joe Alt being on the board at 9, also someone I thought very strongly about. However, I had them going defense with Kool-Aid McKinstry, the cornerback out of the University of Alabama. One of the few strengths on this roster is the secondary. They've obviously got Patrick Surtain at corner, who hasn't necessarily been that top flight corner he was a year ago, but he's still been pretty good. I think part of the reason why he hasn't been as good is there's been some inconsistencies at the position with the other guys. So why not get another truly blue chip prospect at the cornerback position with Kool-Aid McKinstry, a 5-star prospect who has made an impact really ever since he stepped on campus in Tuscaloosa. Over the last 2 years in particular, he's been one of the best corners in the country. He gives you good size, good athleticism, and I think he'll be a perfect fit on the outside with Patrick Surtain. Their pass defense has been an absolute mess this year, and yes, I understand there are bigger needs on this roster, but the Broncos have shown that they, in particular, focus on BPA over need. And if they like Kool-Aid McKinstry, who has some similarities to Patrick Surtain, I think the Broncos might say, why not just get 2 of these guys and pair them up in the secondary?
Moving to pick 10 with the Los Angeles Rams. I think they're in a situation where they have to take BPA as long as it's not a receiver, because Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are fantastic. So looking at BPA, I think this is also a need for the Rams, getting Joe Alt, the tackle, out of Notre Dame. He's probably the other blue chip tackle prospect along with Fashanu. He could definitely go higher than pick 10 to a team like, say, the Colts or even the Raiders. Maybe even the Packers at 6. Their O-line's pretty bad. But the Rams O-line, pretty much since the Super Bowl, has been abysmal. It was one of the worst last year. It's made out of rookies and, second-year sophomore players that me and Octi don't even know the names of. There is a guy named Jonah Williams on their O-line, and it's not the one the Bengals drafted in the first round. I don't know who that guy is, and he was a starter. But the Rams need O-line bad, and he's probably one of the best prospects off from the board. So, big need, BPA. That's just what the Rams need right now.
You're telling me you don't know all those Rams offensive linemen? Speak for yourself. All right, the Washington Commanders with the 11th pick select Dallas Turner, the pass rusher out of Alabama, another Crimson Tide defensive player off the board. This current regime with Martin Mayhew have drafted a lot of Alabama players. Now I'm expecting Washington to clear house. Ron Rivera's gone. Mayhew's gone. I think they're going to totally restart everything as shown by their strategy at the deadline. So at first when you see Dallas Turner, who comes from a 3-4 scheme at Alabama, you think he may not be the most natural fit within Washington's defensive scheme. But when you factor in the fact that there's probably going to be an entire new staff here, maybe it'll be more of a scheme geared towards Dallas Turner, who was very impactful as a true freshman. Last year, I feel like he was a little disappointing, but this year, he's been the number 1 pass rusher for Alabama, and he has been phenomenal. One of the better defensive players in the country, without a doubt. Alabama may not have the talent that they used to have, but they still have 2 very good defensive prospects with Kool-Aid McKinstry and Dallas Turner, who both, as you can see here, are currently going in the top 11.
Moving to pick 12, this was Houston's pick, but they traded to the Arizona Cardinals to get Will Anderson. And the Cardinals are going all in with Caleb Williams. They have to get a receiver alongside him. They kept Hollywood Brown at the deadline. They want him for the future. And they need a guy alongside him. And I think one of the best receiver prospects in this class is Keon Coleman from Florida State. He is a dog. I do not watch a lot of college football. The last game I ever watched was the Florida State Clemson game this year, and all I could see was just one guy making play after play, and I'm like, who is this guy? I have to figure out who this is. And it was Keon Coleman. He had 2 touchdowns in that game. He was just unstoppable. They have a corner who will be later in this draft. He is a good player on his own. Keon Coleman, whatever corner you put up against him, he will make him look just embarrassed. I don't know what it is. He's a great jump ball guy. He's a good route runner. He's got speed, size, athleticism. He is one of my favorite prospects in this draft for what I've looked at so far. I got more to look at, obviously. But for what he brings to the table, I think he's just one of the all-around best receivers in this class. And he reminds me a good bit of a guy like A.J. Brown. He sits 6'4", 215. A.J. Brown not far off. He's sitting at about 6'1", so he's even taller than A.J. Brown. Imagine that A.J. Brown with another 3 inches of height and a good more few inches of vert. With what A.J. Brown's been doing in the NFL, if Keon Coleman could do half of that's a Pro Bowler.
So that will bring up the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with the 13th pick in the draft, and I have them selecting Jared Verse, the pass rusher out of Florida State. Verse is a guy similarly to Olu Fashanu, who we talked about earlier, who could have declared for the draft last year and probably would have been a first-rounder. Verse decides to stay in school, and I think he's been a little bit worse than he was a year ago, but he's still been pretty good. His run defense this year in particular has been a little bit inconsistent, but he's still been very solid as a pass rusher, and he still has the NFL tools that you like. 6'4", 260 pounds, good athleticism for his size. I think the Buccaneers are going to look to add more bodies going after the quarterback. They have obviously drafted Kalijah Kancey in the first round last year. That hasn't really worked out yet, albeit it's been half the season. Let's not jump the gun. But I think they could continue to look to add to their pass rush, and I think Jared Verse, keeping him in the state of Florida, would be a fine pick here at this range of the draft.
Moving to the Chargers at 14, this was another pick that I was baffled at. I looked at so many different positions besides basically QB, and that was it. I expect the Chargers to clean house. I don't think Brandon Staley is going to be here next year, and if he is, that is a problem. I think the head coach and the GM are going to be fired, and they could go a lot of different ways. They could go edge. Khalil Mack is definitely aging, and besides his 6-sack game against the Raiders, there's not much else that he brings to the table. Joey Bosa is still Joey Bosa. Their run defense is awful. Their safeties besides Derwin James are fine. Keenan Allen is getting older. Mike Williams is injured always. Austin Eckler might be out the door soon. The O-line looks fine. But I ended up going to the secondary, and I got them Nate Wiggins, the corner out of Clemson, who I mentioned a few bit ago against Keon Coleman. He brings to the table just coverage. That's basically what the Chargers need, is just defense. Maybe it's just Brandon Staley, but this defense is one of the most expensive and one of the most talented, at least on paper, in football. And it's really hard to see why this team is failing. And I want to see what this team can do without Brandon Staley in the building. And they just traded J.C. Jackson, and they're spending a bunch of money to get him. And besides that, they don't have a lot of corner depth. They don't have a lot of high upside corners. And I think Nate Wiggins is going to be one of those guys where if you bring him into the building, he's going to bring high upside. He's going to bring low floor. He's got the coverage. He's got the man. He's got the press. They just need someone out there to cover those number one receivers.
With the 15th pick, I had the Tennessee Titans going back to the offensive line for a second year in a row with Taliese Fuaga, the offensive tackle out of Oregon State. He primarily plays right tackle. Nick Petit-Frere has missed most of the year due to suspension, and I don't think he's preventing you from making this pick. The Titans' offense has been a black hole for most of the year, with Will Levis coming in against Atlanta. He looked really good. We'll see how he does tonight against the Steelers. I guess all of you watching will probably know how he's done. But regardless, the Titans need more on that offense. They need more guys up front to protect the quarterback and add to the ground game. They need more weapons. Wide receiver could certainly be in play here. But Fuaga's had a very strong season with the Beavers this year, and his stock has really risen with a great senior season. He's a phenomenal run blocker in particular, so I think he's really going to fit that toughness that Mike Vrabel looks for up front, and I think he could be a solid pick here in the middle of the first round.
Moving to the midway of the draft, pick 16, with the New Orleans Saints. They could go a lot of different ways. Their defense is aging. Derek Carr has been fine. Besides Olave, they don't have a lot of good receivers. I know you love Rashid Shaheed, but he's fine. Alvin Kamara is getting older. The O-line is all right, but again, it's getting older. This is a very old team, and they need just depth. They need young and high upside guys. And at least according to PFF, this is one of the highest rated players. I think they have him at like 4 or something. But Chop Robinson out of Penn State, the edge rusher, he is a guy who I could see fall. I think he's more of maybe a Trayvon Walker type of player. I don't think he's going to go 1, but a guy that's very athletic. The stats don't show much, but the athleticism that they have is going to pop off of the table. And you're going to want to get a guy, and if you can get the upside, that could be a Pro Bowl type of player. The Saints have tried to draft edge a lot. They've drafted Peyton Turner. They've drafted Marcus Davenport. They gave a lot to get Marcus Davenport. They drafted Isaiah Foskey last year in the 2nd or 3rd round. So edge is a position that they obviously want to be good at and solidify at, but a lot of these players just have not panned out. And I think Chop Robinson is a guy who definitely could pan out, and I want to see what he can do alongside all the other guys, and maybe one of them can pan out, because the last time a guy panned out, it was Trey Hendrickson, and he left for Cincinnati.
So with the 17th pick, we've got the New York Jets selecting Rome Odunze, the wide receiver out of Washington. Watching him against Oregon, I came away super impressed with this kid. His body control at his size, 6'4", I believe, around 6'3", 215 according to PFF. The way he can quickly flip his hips and quickly change direction is really impressive at his size. And I think he's the type of target that Aaron Rodgers, assuming he'll be back next year, which I would expect he will, is going to like. Garrett Wilson's a great receiver, but the Jets don't have a ton after that. Allen Lazard does not move me. I'm sorry, Aaron Rodgers. Your buddies aren't that good. But Rome Odunze is that good. And I think here at 17, this is not too early at all. I think the value here is perfectly fine. I think this would be a really solid pick for the Jets.
Going to pick 18 with Cincinnati Bengals. I thought of a few different routes they could go. I thought they might be able to go wide receiver. T. Higgins is a free agent at the end of the year, but I'm not too sure if they'll actually be able to resign him or not. If they don't resign him, I think this definitely could just be another receiver. This class is just loaded with them. But I think they want to help Joe Burrow, and especially after the injury, they want to make sure that their highest paid player in the NFL is properly secured. And they're going to go with Graham Barton, the tackle out of Duke. They just got Orlando Brown last year from the Chiefs in free agency, but the right tackle position is a sliding door between Jonah Williams and Lyle Collins. The Collins signing has not panned out, and Jonah Williams, who's been there for 5-6 years or so, has been all right. And I think they'd rather just draft a guy and let the other two kind of go in free agency, let them pave their own path. Get a new guy in there. Let Graham Barton come in there. Doesn't have to be the blindside tackle. And just help out Joe Burrow. Help out the run game. Maybe Joe Mixon ends up leaving. Maybe they need a new running back. Beefing up the O-line is the best way to help out those running backs. Especially if you're just Jamar Chase out there with the receivers. You're going to need a good O-line to help Joe Burrow stay safe, stay secure, and feel protected. They could go on the defensive side. They could go corner. They could go safety. But I think just keeping the offense healthy, like right now they are one of the hotter teams in the league, and I think keeping Joe Burrow's safety is at their highest priorities.
So the Atlanta Falcons here at 19 is an interesting pick because I think a lot of people are going to think this should be a quarterback. Desmond Ritter's not the guy. They don't have their guy on their roster, and we've only had 2 quarterbacks go off the board. And if there is a QB that Atlanta really likes, that's going to be the move here. But we kind of do this every year where at this stage of the year, there's like 6 quarterbacks who go in the first round. That just doesn't happen. Maybe we get 4, 5, the max. But realistically, I would expect we're going to have 3 or 4 quarterbacks go in the first round. And that's not to say Atlanta won't do that here, but I'm not sure they're going to like anybody enough to do it. So I had them going with Jonah Ellis, the pass rusher out of Utah. And his name really has not gotten talked about a whole lot as a first rounder, but I can see the hype. This is a guy who has significantly improved his play each year of his career, and this season he's been one of the most productive pass rushers in the country with 11 sacks. His lowest rated game of the season was this past weekend against Oregon, and he was still pretty good, making plays. And if that's his worst game, then that's got to say something. I think this kid's an intriguing player. I like his versatility, and obviously as a pass rusher, he's been phenomenal with a pass rush win rate close to 21%, and obviously the sack number looks really nice. I think he's going to continue to rise his stock and is going to go earlier than people expect.
Moving to pick 20 with the Minnesota Vikings. We just talked about QBs and how maybe not a lot of them are going to go. And well, here's our third one. Michael Penix Jr. out of Washington goes to Minnesota, keeping up in the cold areas. Right now, the only QB they have locked up for the future is Jared Hall. They just traded for Josh Dobbs. He's, I'm assuming, a free agent. Kirk Cousins was on fire, but tore his Achilles, is out for the year, might not even be ready by the beginning of next year, and is also a free agent. Even if they re-sign Kirk Cousins on probably a 1 or 2 year deal, they don't have a guy for the future, and I think 4 years from now or so, Kirk Cousins probably might not even be in the league, or he'll be a backup. And I really like Kirk Cousins. I love me some Kirk Cousins. We all know this. But they need a guy for the future, and I think even if you sign a guy like Kirk Cousins or just anyone else to kind of be that veteran presence, I think you want to have a QB, and I think this is a very offensive system. Assuming Justin Jefferson's healthy next year, you get Penix Jr., Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson. That is a fantastic weaponry around him. Just figure out a running back who can actually run the ball because Madison and Cam Akers are not doing it apparently. Maybe just go re-sign Dalvin Cook on a cheap deal. Who knows? That could easily happen. But this offense is a very QB-friendly offense. You have some of the best receivers in football. You have one of the best young receivers in football with Jordan Addison. T.J. Hawkins is a top 5 tight end. The O-line is actually pretty good. And the defense needs help. But at the end of the day, it'll get better. You can sign some free agents, trade for some guys. Maybe you end up trading Daniel Hunter. You might get a second or first even out of that. Probably not first, but you'll get a high pick out of that. You will get some new young defensive guys. Let the defense figure itself out. You got to build for the future, and that future starts at the QB position of Michael Penix Jr.
The Pittsburgh Steelers here at 21 select Chris Jenkins, the big defensive tackle out of Michigan. He's still a little bit raw. He's only played around 200 downs this year. He's been really good as a run defender, but needs to improve his pass rushing. But the Steelers are drafting him for upside. This is a really impressive athlete. Who else but the Steelers would you trust to really develop a freaky defensive lineman? And obviously that's an important position for them. They've had Cameron Hayward anchor the defensive line for over a decade, and realistically, he's not going to stick around forever. So I think it would be a good idea to groom his long-term replacement while having those two guys on the field together for as long as possible.
And then moving to pick 22, this was Cleveland's pick that they gave to the Houston Texans in the infamous Deshaun Watson trade. They could go most likely defense here. Their defense on paper is besides Will Anderson, you don't have a lot of edge rushers. The linebacker position looks kind of needy. I do like the secondary, though, with Derek Stingley. And I believe, I already forgot the corner's name. It's fine. But my point being, why not reunite C.J. Stroud with one of his favorite receivers in Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State? I know the receivers are good. Tank Dell's been great. Nico Collins has been looking like a wide receiver one. But why not get us even more help? Breven Jordan and the other tight end that I am blanking on. God, I am really bad right now. I think I'm not doing grids. But the weapons around him are decent. I think you can get even more upside with getting a guy like Egbuka. This year, he's not doing as good as he was last year. But this year, he doesn't have C.J. Stroud. Last year, he did. Reuniting with C.J. Stroud, I think this offense would become even better with a guy like Egbuka. Just give C.J. Stroud a year to progress. Let him reunite with one of his buddies. This offense is going to be great. I think the Texans are going to be spenders in the free agent market. They're going to look at O-line. They're going to look at defense specifically. Maybe a running back, maybe a bit of O-line. But C.J. Stroud's O-line has not been healthy. The running back situation has not been good. And yet he's still looking like one of the best rookie QBs we've seen in probably the past 5 years. And getting him another receiver, one that he already has connection with, that's going to be fantastic for the future of this team.
So that'll bring up the San Francisco 49ers here at 23. Realistically, they're probably going to pick later than this, but this is based on how the order is with the standings right now. And I think the 49ers and Nick Bosa both kind of have the type. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I have them selecting Cooper DeJean, the cornerback out of Iowa. He is another super impressive athlete and somebody who's been really solid at corner over the last couple of years. He's also a weapon. He's one of Iowa's main return men. Of course, he had that crazy punt return touchdown against Minnesota that was called back because of a stupid fair catch call that they thought he made, even though he didn't. But he's a really talented player, and I think he has earned his way into first-round conversation. The Niners need secondary bad. That's the biggest weakness on this team. Charvarius Ward is an awesome corner, but other than that, they don't have a lot. Shout out my guy Diamador Lenore because he's a duck, but realistically, that is the only legitimate hole on this entire roster.
And then going to the Buffalo Bills, I think they have a lot of holes, and I think, there's a lot more holes that they have that people realize. I think the O-line is old and doesn't have a lot of upside. I think the edge position needs a lot of help. I think the safeties are getting older, and they might want to get younger there. I think maybe you even look at a receiver to pair with Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. But I have them going to the edge. I really like Greg Rousseau. Von Miller is aging and still hurt, I think. but getting a guy to replace Von Miller when he leaves and to pair with Greg Rousseau, and it's going to be Bralen Trice out of Washington. This year, he has not been as good as he was last year. Last year, hit double-digit sacks. This year, not looking as much as that, but Washington's been really good, and he's been a big part of that. There's a lot of players this year that we're seeing going in the first round from Washington. We've seen Michael Penix, we've seen Rome Odunze, and now we're seeing Bralen Trice. A lot of these players from Washington are really high upside guys. I like what a lot of them bring to the table. I really like the size that Trice has, 6'4", 270. He can play on the edge and how maybe even go a little inside, but mainly you're going to see him on the edge with Greg Rousseau, maybe alongside Von Miller. I really like the athleticism he brings. I like the veteranship that he brings. He's, I think, a little older. I'm not 100% on that. I could be extremely wrong. But, and I'll say I'm right. Will make me look a little better. But he brings a lot of high upside to this team, fills the holes that this team needs. And I think just having the Bills get better and younger on the defense is what they need, especially after all the injuries they have faced all year.
Now on to the final leg of the first round, and we'll start with the Seattle Seahawks with the 25th pick. And I had them selecting Tyler Nubin, the safety out of Minnesota. This could be a sneaky quarterback spot. If Seattle likes a guy, I think that's 100% in play. But I don't have them going that route. Instead, I had them adding to the secondary. Nubin's been one of the best free safeties in the country this year, but he's versatile. You can also line him up in the box. He's gotten around a third of his snaps in the box this year, and I think Seattle's going to like his versatility along with his great cover ability, which is two things that the Seattle safeties do well. You have Quandre Diggs, who's your cover guy, Jamal Adams, who's generally in the box. Are those two guys long-term pieces, though? Jamal Adams hasn't shown he can stay on the field, and Quandre Diggs, as much as I love the guy, he's getting a little bit older, and he only has one more year left on his deal after this one. So I think getting younger in the secondary is going to be a good idea. We know this team prioritizes talent in the secondary. Corner did not look like some crazy need for this team, but they still drafted Devin Witherspoon at 5. And so far, that's been a really good pick for them. So I think they could have similar logic here, going back to the Big Ten with Tyler Nubin here late in the first round.
Looking at the Cowboys, they do not have a lot of needs for this team. I think a lot of the positions they have, they feel comfortable at. But looking at players who might be getting older, might be underperforming, I want to look at the receiver position. Brandon Cooks, they made a big trade to go get him, and he really hasn't panned out. He just kind of runs streaks, and he's not really open. Michael Gallup has not performed as good as he did before his big injury a few years ago. And besides CeeDee Lamb, I don't know if either of the other two guys are going to be here in the next 2, maybe 3 years. And we've seen that the Cowboys are not afraid to draft a receiver, even if it looks like they don't need one. They drafted CeeDee Lamb having 2 already really good receivers, and yet they still drafted him, mainly to get him away from Philly, but they still drafted a receiver. I think this year they could do similar things. The next few teams could be looking at receiver. We've seen the Ravens, even though they got Zay Flowers last year. The Lions could be looking at receiver. The Chiefs desperately need receiver. They could be thinking, let's go get a receiver now, get one of the higher-end guys, and that's going to be Adonai Mitchell out of Texas. I went back and forth between him, the other Texas receiver, one of Oxy's guys who will go soon. And this class is deep at wide receiver, but I think a lot of them are going to fall into the second round. When we see a class with a very deep positional group, a lot of them like to fall into the later half of the first round, the second round, third round, because teams are thinking there's so many on the board, let's wait. We saw 2019. We saw teams like guys like DK Metcalf, A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel, Terry McLaurin. They all looked like very talented guys that could go late first, early second. And we see them fall to go late second in the third round, and guys like Deebo and Scary Terry. For this year, I think that could happen with the same thing. There's a lot of high upside edges and receivers that we don't even have going in this first round draft. And that's not against those guys. It's against how I see the positional value. And I think the Cowboys aren't afraid to shoot their shot. And I think the Cowboys are going to go get a guy like Mitchell. He's a big guy. He's 6'4", almost 200 pounds. He's kind of the opposite of CeeDee Lamb. He's very athletic, but he's a jump ball guy. And I think that's what they need alongside CeeDee Lamb, who is a very route runner, very shifty, very fast receiver. Getting a guy who can be a red zone threat, who can be a jump ball guy, instead of just getting more speed, more speed, more speed. Even because the Chiefs, it works normally. But for the Cowboys, that just doesn't work. You have Dak Prescott, not Patrick Mahomes. So getting a guy who's a jump ball guy, a red zone threat, that's going to be a big need for the Cowboys in the next few years.
That'll bring up the Jacksonville Jaguars here at pick 27, and I think they could look to add another vertical element to their offense, and that's where Troy Franklin comes into the picture. He's been one of the best wide receivers in the country this year with the Oregon Ducks. He makes multiple splash plays a game. You can't teach the size and speed that he brings to the table, along with his consistency on a week-to-week basis. It's very clear that Bo Nix trusts him as the number one receiver in this offense, and Franklin has really been able to flourish. PFF has Troy Franklin ranked in the 90s. I don't really know why. His ranking has gone down throughout the year, which honestly makes no sense to me because Troy Franklin, who was really good last year, has taken another step up this year as a junior. And I think with his NFL tools, along with the vertical presence that he brings to the Jaguars offense, I think this would be a great pick here towards the back end of the first round.
Looking at the Ravens, I think one of their bigger needs at receiver, they have been able to fix. Say Flowers looks electric. We're seeing Rashad Bateman take the steps to be another good player. So I think they can, for once, not take a receiver in the first 2 rounds. And I think they need to go look at corner because besides Marlon Humphrey, who do you have at the cornerback position who you really trust? You have Kyle Hamilton, who's more of a safety, but he can kind of play corner. But your next best corner is what? Bradley Roby? That's not a guy who you want to see in the future. I doubt he's going to be on the Ravens by next year. So I have them going with Denzel Burke, the corner of Ohio State. And at least according to PFF, it's a little bit of a reach. He was rated in about the 50s, I think. But looking at all the corners, there's not another corner that I feel who's super high and who's like an absolute gotta-be first round. I think those main 2 are going to be Kool-Aid and Nate Wiggins. But I think Denzel Burke is a guy who could sneak into that late first round. We've seen a lot of corners go in the late first round. We saw Kyrie Elam a few years back. We saw a lot of corners go last year. Devin Witherspoon, Gonzo, Emmanuel Forbes. There was a few others that I'm forgetting. But I definitely think Denzel Burke is a guy who could reach up boards, who couldn't get up there. He has a lot of consistency. He's a little bigger. He's a 6'1" corner. I feel like we see a lot more like 5'11", 6-foot guys. So he's a little taller. And I really like that out of a corner. I think that's what they need, a little bit of size on the outside. I think pairing with Marshawn Lattimore, that's a great pairing, even though it's Ohio State-Bama rivalry. But I think getting another corner alongside Humphrey to help out for that future, again, especially in a division with guys like Jamar Chase, George Pickens, Amari Cooper, T. Higgins, at least for now. But you need, if you're going to be in the AFC, you need to have good corners. You need to have good receivers, good corners. They're getting there with the receivers. Say Flowers looks good. Get Denzel Burke. Get a guy for the future. And their Super Bowl window is open. I'm all in on this Ravens team. I think they are fantastic, but they need to get younger and they need to get guys to be who's going to be here for the next 5 years.
That'll bring up my beloved Detroit Lions here with the 29th pick. And there were a few guys I looked at. I think the 2 positions that this team needs in particular is edge rusher and corner. If we were to go corner here, I like Josh Newton a lot out of TCU. I think that'd be a solid pick. There are other avenues the Lions could go, maybe another offensive lineman, maybe another receiver. But I was going with a pass rusher with Princely Umanmielen out of Florida. He hasn't really been talked about a lot, but I think he very well could be a first-rounder. If you look at the size and length he brings to the table, it's really impressive. He has a pass rush win rate of nearly 30% this year. And yes, the sack numbers aren't going to jump off the page. He only has 3 sacks this year, but this guy gets to the backfield, he makes plays, and I think he's really going to be a riser throughout the pre-draft process, and I think he very well could be a first-rounder. And for a team like the Lions, who needs a number 2 edge rusher really badly, I think this would be a solid pick. The Lions have a number of good rotational edge rushers around Aiden Hutchinson, but they need another guy, and I think Princely Umanmielen could very well be the second wheel to this pass rush, along with Hutchinson and, of course, Aleem McNeil in the middle, who I think is one of the most underrated players in the entire NFL.
Getting to the final 3 picks, at pick 30, we have the Miami Dolphins, and we all know their offense is pretty good. So, logically, they got to look at the defense side of the ball. They have had struggles on this side of the ball. This past week, they got Jalen Ramsey back, so the secondary is going to look a little better. Xavier Howard is still around. Javon Holland. The secondary looks good. Linebackers are a little needy, but I'm not 100% if many linebackers are going to go in the first round. But looking at the D-line, especially that front seven, they need another guy opposed of Jalen Phillips. And this is a guy who could go higher. We could see some other edges fall. I talked about how heavy position groups, they tend to fall. This is no exception with JT Tuimoloau. I hope I said that right. The edge at Ohio State. Again, this is a guy who we could see go higher. He could go maybe in the top half of the first round, depending on if other guys' stocks falls, if his stock rises. I think he's been a little worse than last year, but I think his physical upside brings a lot to the table. I think he has a lot to bring to the position. He's 6'4", 270. I really want to see what he brings to the table with his athleticism. I think he is one of the more athletic edges in this class, and I can't wait to see what he brings when it comes to the NFL Combine here in a couple months. But this year, he has brought a lot of just very raw pass rush, and I think he's one of the better guys on getting on the outside, doing the swim move, already there. And I think the Dolphins just need a guy who can get to the QB, make opposing QBs just uncomfortable. We haven't seen a lot of that from this Dolphins team this year. Jalen Phillips is their really only edge rusher. We've seen Andrew Van Ginkel play fairly well. He's one of the higher grade edge rushers this year. But again, it's Andrew Van Ginkel. No one's going to hear that name and fear it. But a guy who's the name of JT Tuimoloau, I think I'd fear that name. And I'm a big guy on the name game. I like hearing the names. And I think this man right here, Tuimoloau, that is a terrifying name and a terrifying beast of a human.
When in doubt, the name game never fails. That'll bring up the Chiefs here at 31, my last pick of the day. And I already know Kansas City Chiefs fans are not going to like this because I do not have them going with a wide receiver. And yes, I understand that wide receiver is a big need, and there are some solid options. You could look at one of the speedsters like Xavier Worthy or Xavier Leggett. Johnny Wilson, the big body target out of Florida State. Jalen Polka's had a good year out of Washington as well. But I had the Chiefs going on the defensive side of the ball with Leonard Taylor III out of the University of Miami. The Chiefs have focused on improving the edge rushing unit over the last couple of years with George Karlaftis, who's really turning into a good player, Felix Anudike-Uzomah last year in the first round, and now they're going to get another piece for the middle in Leonard Taylor. I think him and Chris Jones together is going to be a really fun pairing, and realistically, Chris Jones is not going to stick around forever. Taylor was a highly regarded recruit out of high school. The athletic traits are definitely there, and he's been pretty solid this year. This is somebody who I think is scheme versatile. He's a solid pass rusher, improving run defender, and I think he would be a really solid piece in the middle of that Chiefs defensive line to make that group even more fearsome. I get the receivers are bad, but I think you're going to have plenty of other opportunities, whether it's later in the draft or in free agency or with the trade market, to improve the wide receiver position.
And moving to the final pick in the first round, which right now is slated to be my Philadelphia Eagles. And at this point, what position do they really need? They have no real needs. I talked about it with the Cowboys. The Eagles are even better when it comes to not having a specific need. Maybe you look at a D-line again. We drafted 2 guys last year, but Hassan Reddick's going to need a contract soon. Josh Sweat needs a contract soon. BG's getting older. Fletcher Cox getting older. You could look at the secondary. That's been one of the more disappointing positions this year. Darius Slay is old. James Bradbury is old. Fonte Maddox doesn't know what a healthy knee looks like. But and you could even look at safety, but Reed Blankenship's been good. We just went out and got Kevin Byard. And it is the most anti-Howie Roseman thing to do. But I think we need to look at linebacker. And this guy might not be the best linebacker according to PFF. He might not be the best linebacker according to the NFL media, NFL players, NFL coaches, whoever. But for the storyline and for the narrative, I'm all in on Jeremiah Trotter Jr. going to the Philadelphia Eagles. If you are an Eagles fan, you know who this name is. He was a linebacker for the Eagles, Jeremiah Trotter Sr., that is. He was a great linebacker in the Donovan McNabb era. And now his son is back up. He is playing linebacker, and he is a star at Clemson. I think he's one of the brighter sides of the Clemson team that has not been the greatest. They've had their ups and downs, but I believe that Trotter Jr. is one of the better guys on this defense. Him and Nate Wiggins looks fantastic. I don't know if Trotter's going to declare this year, but if he does, I could see him get a lot of hype, a lot of buzz. I think he has a lot of leadership after learning from a guy like Jeremiah Trotter Sr. He was one of the better leaders of that Eagles locker room. When we went to the NFC Championship 4 years in a row, to the Super Bowl in 2004, I think learning from a guy like him, being able to learn the position, learn how to be a leader, that's something that he needs. He was one of the higher recruits out of his high school class. I think this is a guy who people are going to rave about when it comes to the interview portion of the NFL draft cycle. I don't know if he'll go actually in the first round. Probably not, because linebackers don't go in the first round, unless your name is Jack Campbell and you're the Lions, because they don't care about positional value. But I don't think the Lions are going to be drafting a linebacker anytime soon. They got Jack Campbell. They got Morad. They're fine. And Howie Roseman hates drafting linebackers, so I doubt it happens. But I definitely could see a guy like Trotter Jr. sneak up boards, hit the interviews, hit the intellectual side of the ball, know what he's talking about, and people rave about him. People love him, about what he brings on the field and off the field. That's about all I got. He's just a great dude. He knows what he's talking about, and I cannot wait to see what he's able to do for the draft cycle whenever he declares.
Fellas, get someone who talks about you like Nick Nader talks about Jeremiah Trotter Jr. That'll wrap up the episode here. Our first unofficial mock draft in the book, and obviously once we get closer to draft season into the month of January as the college football playoff wraps up and the NFL playoffs kick off, that's when draft season, at least for me, really starts. And so we're going to be pumping out content just like we did last year. Nick and Nader, if you have any final words before we wrap up, let them out.
Don't have much. I'm just begging for Emeka Egbuka to join CJ Stroud, and happy agenda season.
Happy agenda season. There's nothing like it. So make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. We've got some fun stuff planned with some special guests over the next couple of weeks, which should be fun. We're excited for you guys to see what we have in store there. And that'll wrap things up. Peace out.